Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is jointly delivered by Maarga Systems and TrustSphere. I'm Chirag Bharate from Maarga and I am your host for today's webinar. The topic that we discuss today is relationship analytics and driving adoption for collaboration in enterprise social platforms. Before I introduce you to the speakers, I would like to remind you that this session is being recorded and it would be made available shortly. Uh, we also have a short Q&A session at the end of the discussion. Our presenters for today are Venkatesh Krishnamurthy, who is the CEO of Maarga Systems, and Manish Goyal, who is the CEO of TrustSphere. Venki would be starting the webinar today and would hand over to Manish to cover the second half of the webinar. I would quickly go through introductions for both the firms. Maarga Systems is a premier IBM partner with offices in US, India, and customers across the globe. They are experts in business workflow, enterprise mail and messaging, collaboration software, as well as a special focus on software adoption. Uh, Here is a glimpse of some of the customers that Maarga Systems has worked with over the years. Moving to TrustSphere, TrustSphere was founded in Singapore and has offices in New York, London, and Sydney. They are pioneers in relationship analytics and people analytics. Their products and solutions provide insights via analytics to hundreds of enterprise as well as government organizations globally. You can see some of the partners and customers that TrustSphere is associated with on the slide. So before we jump into today's webinar, we wanted to run a short poll to understand our audience properly. So I would be starting a poll and you would have 30 seconds to give your feedback, which will help us to drive the webinar in the right direction. So the question we are asking today is, at what stage of enterprise social network adoption is your organization? And the options are, it is an integral or core part of your organization's processes, or it's extensively used and widely adopted, it's used moderately with low levels of adoption, or you have it deployed but is rarely used, or you don't have a ESN at all. So I'm launching the poll, and you have 30 seconds to give your feedback. Okay, we have 60% voted, waiting for 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm closing the poll now and I'll display the results. And these are the results. So what we basically see is that we have a mix of audience today with almost equal percent of people who have their organization either widely adopted or is using it moderately. So with that background, I would like to hand over the control to Venki to start today's webinar.
Thanks, Chirag. So, hello everyone, and thanks again for taking the time for this webinar. So, as the poll showed, the key agenda before us is to move our organizations on the adoption spectrum from moderately adopted to completely adopted to social being an integral part, being part of the DNA of our organizations. So let me get started with a little bit of a context. When we started on this journey more than 10 years back, there was a lot of promise that social offered. There was promise of integrating the social fabric into core business processes like procure to pay or order to cash, or processes like onboarding employees, right? And there was also this promise of technology as a business enabler and not just as a support function in transforming organizations into digital businesses that will enable people who are increasingly spread out in a worldwide team to to relate with each other and collaborate to deliver on the business results. There's also expected to be a single platform for knowledge creation, aggregation, and delivery. So there's a lot of promises that we started off with. And if you are to look at where we are on those promises, I think we've come significantly. I think we've come significantly in the sense that um, companies have started adopting social networks significantly. So this latest study by McKinsey shows the level of adoption over the last 10 years, and you can see that some of the more common technologies like blogging and the core enterprise social networks have been significantly adopted. So you're talking of a 65, 66% adoption rate for the most common, and that's most mainstream organizations. It's only the laggard phase that's still left behind in one sense, the companies that are slow on the uptake of technology. But uh, the core technologies have been significantly adopted, but it's a very different thing as to whether significant adoption means diffusion through the organization, and that's what we are going to talk about today. So this particular survey was around 1,500 companies, a fairly significant sample size, and we see the adoption levels here. So when you talk of good level of adoption, the reality actually on the ground is there is two types. There is one company level adoption, which is what we call the stroke of the pen strategy, where a senior executive or like the management gets convinced about the need and the utility of this technology, and then signs a big check and has the technology rolled out. And then there is the harder to achieve goal, which is your behavior change, getting employees to use it the way it was envisioned to be used. And that's a harder part of the change. It's easier to write a check, but to get people to behave in different ways and squeeze the juice out of this technology, that takes a whole lot more. And that's the reality that we are contending with today. So going back to McKinsey and their study about level of adoption, you find that there is a certain network effect to companies adopting social software. So when you look at the table on the right side, you see the level of value or the impact that's delivered inside organization when the adoption level is at 25%, 50%, 75%, or 100%. So if you take the top row, which is social networking, you find that when the adoption is at one-fourth of the organization, just a quarter of the organization, which is the early adopters, the value is significantly smaller. When you just double the number of users, the impact triples. So it's non-linear. Essentially, what it means is the more people that are connected to the network, even more value is delivered. It's not just a linear progression based on the number of people, but it's not exactly an exponential progression, but a non-linear that tends towards an exponential kind of a progression. So when you look at it, when the entire organization is adopted, that's nearly 10 times as much impact as just 25% of the organization adopting that particular technology. Of course, this varies for the different social technologies, but the essential idea is the same. So adoption pays. The key thing that we know is that when we have invested in a technology and we get people to use the technology really, it results in business outcomes, and that's what we're interested in. But change is tough to cope with. It's like knowing that this technology or this platform is superior to other platforms is very different than using it, seeing the benefit out of it, being convinced about it, and living it, right? So, this is a funny picture here. We all know that a wheel is much more efficient than feet are. So if you are to come up with a model of using wheels for moving about every day, it might increase the speed, but it's going to lead to a lot of behavioral changes and challenges. So it's difficult to anticipate all the kind of situations in which you might use feet. use it sitting down, climbing upstairs, dancing, turning around. It's impossible to figure out all those things. So behavior change needs a lot of hand-holding and a lot of structure and a lot of planning. And that's why you need, we've seen that there is a need for a structured adoption framework, and that's bulk of what we do, which is structuring this whole amorphous need of wanting to get more people to use the network and realize more um, out of the investment, and taking it through paces so that the organization, mindless of where they are in their individual orientation to these technologies, people get started using them in their workplace significantly. So our framework, as we've done it, is like is a reference framework for us. We use this as a starting point, and we tweak this to ensure that it matches where a particular company finds itself. There are times we get into engagements where companies have already launched it, and the launch has gone off well, but there is like stagnation after some time. And there are times we get into engagements where the launch itself didn't quite take off, and we have to do a relaunch, so to say. And there are times where it's use patchy. Some parts of the organization are picking it up, and other parts are not picking it up. So we use this as a reference model, and we go and we tweak it to fit the customer. So this is a 5-phase thing. So you start with planning the entire service, and preparing for it in terms of pilots and learning from the pilots, and creating a roadmap, and then the actual implementation, which is typically a big event, and there it is training, creating a roadmap for support, and actually doing the launch. And phase 4 is the critical part, like as far as adoption is concerned, which is building the awareness, creating the use cases, and building practical applications, and creating a complete collaboration calendar, and helping companies move along with that. And then the final phase is one of evolution, and evolving the network to keep pace with the business reality. So along the way, we do a whole lot of things, like assessing the culture of the organization, to figuring out practical use cases, creating training material, videos, and things like that. Road shows where we encourage people to come into to booths that are set up in high traffic areas within the organization, where people can come and have a feel of the network. So we kind of do a lot of stuff which creates buzz, and we also support people, key people through this whole thing, which results in the adoption being sustained. So this framework works at multiple levels. At the highest level is like the conceptual level of so for example, let me take the example of creating operational teams. Then we get down to the details in terms of defining the operation teams. If finding the influencers, from a large mass of organization, and here influencers need not necessarily strictly follow the traditional organizational structure, and we need to find them. At times, it's it's a significant challenge to cut through the organization's formal view of itself to find out who really moves and shakes things there. And we use help from tools like TrustSphere in such in this phase. And then we detail out roles and responsibilities. We also recruit and train the influencers and motivate them, create a community for them, and then define calendar. And then there is after the definition, there is the actual execution of it, which is actually conducting the trainings and manning the community and kickstarting the community of influencers and things like that. So it operates at deep level. So what I showed you earlier is a high level representation, the top level representation, but we go a couple of levels below to ensure that this is completely rolled out inside the organization. So the way we deliver the framework, this is not just an intellectual exercise for us where it's just not a model. It's something that's a model plus services. So there's a people component to it, which is augmenting your team with the necessary either adoption resources or platform resources, technical resources. And there is a lot of knowledge in terms of how to roll out the platform, and bringing in third-party tools which will significantly accelerate the speed with which this solution will stick and integrate into your organization, and assets which increase your productivity in terms of rolling out, moving communities, moving content between communities, managing users in bulk, loading users in bulk, and things like that. And then there is the process piece of it, which is governance processes and sustenance process and mapping traditional process and creating social processes out of them. So the framework itself is not just an intellectual toolkit; it's actually a delivered experience and a reality for our customers. So we like saying that adoption is like enlightenment. It's not a mechanical thing; it's an organic thing, and we like relating the story of a seeker who goes to a master and says, "Master, I'd like to get enlightened. How long will it take?" And the master says, uh, maybe a year. And this is a tough question for like someone like Zen Master to answer because there's no standard structures to enlightenment. And the seeker persists and seeker asks, Master, I'd like to put double the effort, work overtime. How long will it take? The master thinks about it and then says, maybe then 2 years. Because when you push something like enlightenment, it doesn't happen. So when you push, adoption is very similar. When you push a technology or a culture down the throat of people, they revolt. They need time to absorb what this is, how this fits in for them, how they can make use of it. You need to create that aha moment in them. Particularly, you need to create the aha moment in the key influencers, and then they will pull others along. So as we say, slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. So slow is fast when it comes to the matter of adoption. So what we find is that when we take the structured framework and we roll it out with customers, we prevent the regression, right? There's a lot of enthusiasm with which social initiatives are started, but with a sustained adoption, we find that you can have widespread usage across the enterprise and make those business processes fundamentally social, which is a culture thing which stays with your company for a long time. The return kind of keeps coming over a period of time. Um, and if you don't do that, there is a significant chance of regression, right? Like there is spotty adoption, some parts of the organization adopting and others that don't, and processes that stay the old way without really having been redesigned into social methods, right? So that's what we've seen, and that's what we've delivered in our engagements around adoption. So as I said, like there is many parts in our framework where there is a need for understanding what the organization really looks like behind the formal layer and understand how it works. And that part is significantly delivered by the relationship analytics tools. And that's what Manish and his team does the best. So let me hand this over to Manish so that he can carry on from here.
Thank you very much, Venki. I would, perfect. As I just transition over. Thank you very much, Venki. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a number of, with organizations, it's adoption is such a big concern when it comes to delivering the promise that social enterprise social technology has to deliver. Just very quickly, in terms of Chirag introduced us, but at TrustSphere, we're pioneers in an area that we call relationship analytics. What relationship analytics does is it sits between the intersection of big data analytics, and social network analytics. And effectively, what we're doing for any organization is we're really understanding what's going on within the social network. That's through communication logs, email, voice, IM, SMS, etc. Building out the social graph for an organization, and then delivering a set of insights into different business applications. Business applications including sales, CRM systems, including risk and governance systems, as well as talent management systems. Today, though, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we're working with, we work with, in partnership with Maarga to really help accelerate the adoption for enterprise social network systems. So again, we have a methodology and approach which integrates neatly into the Maarga framework to help change teams really accelerate their use and the acceptance of enterprise social technology. A little bit about us as well. I mean, Gartner, and we can make these particular reports available, or if you're Gartner subscribers, you can get this. It's so they position us in the social network analytics space. Likewise with IDC, they position us really at the frontier as the next frontier of analytics. But if you have a look at, if you imagine what a social network looks like, this is a picture of how a social network grows. I think is in terms of network behavior. This is a time-lapse view of how a network is growing. I mean, as Venki had mentioned, really, if you look at adoption, it's not linear in itself, and the benefits of adoption are exponential the more people that are involved. As you can see, being able to understand and see what's happening within networks becomes a very powerful way for change teams to be able to actually do two or three things. One is communicate the benefits back to their management. Secondly, identify issues or where there may be bottlenecks. But thirdly, and the one I really talk about a little bit later on, is getting started in terms of setting up the appropriate change teams for an organization. So what we're doing at TrustSphere is really understanding the relationship strength between individuals. What we're doing is understanding in our production systems, look at both internal and external social networks. So with customers, suppliers, and partners, as well as between individuals. What we're looking at is all the connections, and then on top of every connection, we look at every interaction that occurs, and we redraw effectively the social graph. And we're doing this based off communication flows, as I mentioned, email, voice, IM, SMS. What we don't do is we don't touch the content, and that's specifically for privacy and to protect people's privacy. In terms of where we fit very neatly into the methodology that Venki had mentioned previously, but specifically around identifying change champions. What we're able to do is very accurately identify who the change champions are within an organization by looking for who the most influential people are. What we're also able to do then is measure adoption and visualize progress. And that allows change teams in that journey towards complete adoption, or at least large-scale adoption of enterprise social networks, to continuously realign their initiatives based on data rather than just instinct. Oops. Let me talk to you quickly about a case study that we have. This is a global software company that came to us, and they asked us, they were in the process of deploying an enterprise social platform. What they recognized, just broadly, there were about 10,000 people with offices around the world, and they were growing very fast. Therefore, as part of growing very fast, they had high staff turnover. That meant that an enterprise social platform became a very important piece of knowledge retention and knowledge management. So it was a strategic initiative from the top down. However, the problem that they had was they only had 500 really active users out of 10,000 staff. So the approach that we took with them was to identify who actually has real influence within the organization. I identified those who have the strongest level of what we call centrality. And use statistics effectively, or analytics, to identify the people who are the most active and most connected people within the organization, and look to we use that basis as a way of identifying who the advocates should be that we should recruit into the change teams. Again, the idea here is that once you're able to identify those champions, those who are currently the most active within their own social networks, they're the ones who will be able to bring their own. They'll be the ones who will be able to bring their own networks onto the collaboration platform. One of my favorite sayings: "It's a capital mistake to theorize before one has all the data." People tend to, if you can read that through, but effectively, people start to twist facts to suit theories rather than theories to suit facts. This is from Sherlock Holmes. What gets interesting here is when you talk about change champions. Most people look at organizations and say they look at them structurally and look at the people who are either at the top of the totem pole or who they know to be good influences. The problem is the data in itself often tells you something different. The process that we go through is to identify who, from a statistics perspective, get the facts on the table. So who are the most connected and the most active people? We know they're highly influential within the organization. Again, we use the theory of node centrality here. We know that organizations are quite organic, actually. We think that power is hierarchical. In fact, power within the organization is quite organic. So being able to see that organic picture is a very important piece for change teams. But what we do effectively is we identify, we build an influencer score per person. And we do that based on two key aspects, connectivity and activity. So who are the most connected people and who are the most active people? And what we can do is stack rank people based on purely their ability to influence. It's a little bit like a clout score for those of you who are familiar with it. And it becomes a proxy for social influence within the enterprise, within an enterprise. Again, from a statistical perspective, what we're doing is we're simply taking and we mask the employee numbers such that we at TrustSphere don't see them. But what we're able to do is give back a level of network activity score or an influencer score per individual. And what that does, it allows change teams, and this is what our client had done, they use this as the basis to form the change teams as the advocate teams as they went through the next phase of their social network platform deployment. Again, we all know that in terms of being able to realize a faster adoption, again, as Venki said, there's exponential benefits from greater adoption. And at the end of the day, it accelerates ROI, reduces the payback period, increases the knowledge capture, and more importantly, it reduces the risk of projects themselves stalling. So the results for our client were to get a much better understanding of the informal org chart. And what they were able to do is choose the right social advocates from within their teams. And they did this by both department and by geography. So they looked at the total, the staff rank, and used that as a way of shortlisting people that they otherwise would probably have missed within the environment. So again, one question that usually comes up is privacy. From a privacy perspective, privacy is something that we at TrustSphere take very, very seriously. We're compliant with a number of the key legislations around the world, in particular the EU legislation, the OECD legislation, which is what most of the US privacy legislation is based on, as well as some other geos. What we do is we run this as a service. We have this data is masked to protect client privacy. We assign simply a number to each employee. It's just a random number, so we don't have any employee identifiers. We don't actually look at any of the content, including not looking at any of the subject lines, nor are we looking at any external data. But what we're doing is looking at around 90 days worth of data and understanding who's connected to who and how well are they connected and what that strength of relationship is based on our algorithms. As I said, we take privacy very, very seriously, and we comply with most of the major legislations around the world, privacy legislations around the world. What it effectively does is it helps to break the dilemma of trying to get adoption or accelerate adoption by giving change teams the map that they need as they embark on the journey. I noticed that there's a number of you who are already from the poll. There are a number of you where widespread adoption is occurring. That's fantastic. Where there's moderate adoption occurring, or indeed where you're embarking on the process of setting up an ESN. This map, it gives you the ability to really understand how to do it best. And as an analogy, you would never go hiking through some mountains without maps. What we're able to do is provide the change teams with those maps, which take the guesswork out of being able to identify who to involve and who not to involve. It helps accelerate the outcome. Finally, I mean, at our end, we see that measuring and visualizing change is also an essential part of the process. To be able to go back to the management team or to the executive teams and show that adoption has started and is commencing, and that there is a layer of activity that's going on, is a very powerful way of both being able to get additional funding for next phases and also to embark on new initiatives within that need to be done as part of the overall journey. So a number of ways that we work with Maarga and with our clients is to identify where there are bottlenecks or issues, how we can prove the value, demonstrate that there is actual adoption going on, and finally to look at where there is an ability to actually fine-tune the approach that was originally envisaged. We also have an adoption dashboard which starts to show what level of activity did go on in email and is no longer going on in email. So again, these are just ways that we bring analytics into the process of change management and, more importantly, adoption around a social network. So I'll leave you with just a quick picture as to how we once again articulate to executives how networks are growing and how that internal social network is growing for any organization. On that, I will hand it over to hand it back to Chirag. Chirag, thank you very much, and we'll hand it over and open it up to the audience for any questions.
Thank you, Manish, and thank you, Venki. We are opening up the floor for any questions. I have one for you, Manish, here, so I'll just read it out for you. We'll spend the next 5 to 7 minutes answering the questions. Question is specifically, what data do you look at? Emails, blogs, chat, or anything else?
So the answer to that one is it depends. It depends on which data we have access to. Typically what we find for a diagnostic or being able to identify to do the first phase of a particular of identifying the change champions, we simply look at email, and the reason for that is it becomes a very easy to deal with mechanism, and it's kind of a proxy for existing social activity. So we look at email, we look around, we typically ask our clients to give us 90 days worth of logs. We don't touch subjects, we only ever look at internal data as well. So we're only looking at internal activity, and that's specifically to help avoid any of the otherwise issues that come up that raise their heads from privacy perspective. But we can look at a vast range of other different mechanisms depending on how sophisticated a particular client wants to be, and also whether the product is being used in production to ingest a variety of communication data and push it back into business applications, or alternatively it's being used for a diagnostic purpose, as I described earlier on in this webinar, specifically around identifying change champions.
Okay. So second question is, if you are trying to measure activity of an ESN, why look at email?
We look at email as a way of so there's two phases with any ESN deployment. Phase one is where there is no ESN, so it's impossible to look at what activity is occurring on the ESN because there is none. But in phase two, when there is an ESN, we think that there is a way of measuring both. So when there is no ESN, what you want to do is you want to look at what activity is happening in a proxy environment, and there is a proxy environment for social. It's called email. So that's why we go there first. And that becomes a very easy way of being able to see what's happening in the existing social network. And it gives you an idea as to what you want to migrate across or who you want to migrate across most quickly to the enterprise social network. Once the ESN is in place, there's two things you want to look at. Absolutely, you want to look at the activity that's going on in the ESN. And most ESN platforms give you the analytics or the statistics that show you what activity is happening there. What our clients use us to do as well is to look at what email is happening on email. But what's important with email is you're actually starting to show a reduction in email, and in particular a reduction on things like file sharing and attachments on email, and with a migration across to the ESN. What that does, the two pieces of the puzzle there start to build the case and prove the case around enterprise social adoption.
Okay, thanks. The next question, I think either of you can answer. It's people think of social network most relevant to younger millennials. I have a clientele of 11,000, mostly in their 60s. Any special advice?
Venki, did you want to take this, or I've got a couple of minutes too?
Sure. Let me get started, and you can add on a little bit also much. So definitely the younger folks in the workplace are a lot more natural at social than the old audience. But I think social as a technology, as a concept, is matured over the last few years. Increasingly find that from the consumer space, people have experience of social technologies, and they really have seen the benefits there. And it's about mapping those onto the workplace. And again, it is about finding those people. There are some people who really use social technologies fairly well, who map on how their existing offline conversations kind of continue in the online space. So it's about identifying those people again, and there's definitely a lot of potential there, even for older people. But you definitely have your work cut out, because it's not a common situation to find such things. But social definitely has its place in this scenario also. Manish?
Yeah, just to add to what Venk is saying, I totally agree. I think with the profile that you just described, you do have your work cut out for you to an extent. However, the way that we would approach something like that is to look at within the group of people that you have who are sort of in their 60s, let's say, there's going to be some, not all of them, who are social, but all of them will be used to having conversations. I mean, that's a trait of that generation. It's a matter of looking at migrating some of those conversations over onto an enterprise social platform. So the idea, once again, is to look at who are those key influences within that particular demographic and bring their conversations onto the platform. Again, I think a variety of the ESN platforms are designed to be relatively easy to use. The issue is not about the use of the technology, but it's about getting people and getting the right people to have the right conversations on the platform. And in that sense, it's incredibly being able to identify those champions, because there will be some amongst that group who are the champions, who are the most influential. They're the ones that you want to quickly identify accurately and bring on, because they'll bring their networks on. The other thing, the other two quick comments, I think, with the profile that you described there, knowledge transfer is critical. I mean, a little bit back to our client software company, they had a different problem because they were dealing with Gen X's and Gen Y's, but they were looking at fast staff turnover. You've got an inherent level of staff turnover that is about to exist, and that extends itself into two things. One is knowledge, which will otherwise walk out the door, and the other one is relationships, which will otherwise walk out the door. And being able to get those into a systematic application means that you've got better continuity when the new generation does come in to take over from the ones who are going to be retiring.
Okay. Moving to the next one. Question is for you, Manish. So, Manish mentioned talent management. Could these relationship tools be used to analyze the impact of someone leaving a company and impact on the network?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can do what-if analysis, if that's the question. Yes, we can. We can help to model that. From a talent management perspective, the use case there is actually quite interesting. A lot of people look at employee surveys as a way of being able to look at what employee engagement really looks like. What we can do, again, without looking at any of the content, because we don't want to introspect the content to protect privacy, but looking at network activity, it gives you an idea as to what levels of engagement are occurring and what aren't occurring, or where there are changes in that occurring. So the answer around talent management is absolutely it can be used to help look at what would happen in the event of somebody who is call them a maven or a hub or a connector actually leaving the organization. But often enough that's too late, so we find that when you only find out about that too late if you haven't been running the technology in advance. What this allows you to do is quickly remedy that, because otherwise when someone does leave, it's very difficult to restore their connections. We have the ability to, in sort of one very quick deployment, tell you who all the connections are for any particular person who is about to leave, such that they can be transitioned fairly quickly to the people who remain in the organization.
Okay. The last question here is, what is your relationship with Avertus? How might that expand your sphere of data for analysis?
Yeah, so Avertus is a new partner of ours and a very esteemed partner of ours. They have the ability to look specifically at unified communication data. So they have deep integrations into Cisco, into Avaya, into Skype for Business. What that does is it brings us beyond just looking at email, but also allows us to look at a wide range of communication modes. So again, our vision is humans communicate, and they communicate using different modes at different times for different purposes. With our partnership with Avertus, what we're able to do is bring that fuller picture together with regards to to how individuals within an enterprise are communicating and what that enterprise, what that true enterprise social graph looks like.
Okay. Thanks, Manish. So I think that was the last question. If we have no further questions, I think we can close this question answer session because we had reserved 10 minutes today. But if you have any further questions or queries, I think feel free to drop a note to either of the speakers today, and we would try to get back to you as soon as possible. So with that, I would like to thank everyone who is here today to attend this webinar, as well as to Manish and Venki for spending time with us and sharing their views. We look forward to seeing you again in future in our other webinars. So goodbye and have a very good day.